The sharp, piercing clink of a silver knife striking crystal cut right through the soft, ambient hum of the string quartet. It was a demanding sound, ringing out over the quiet chatter of 300 elite guests dining on truffle risotto and seared sea bass. I didn't even need to look up from my sweetheart table to know who had commandeered the room's attention: Chloe, my sweet, innocent, perennially fragile younger sister. She stood at the far end of the head table, bathed in the warm golden glow of the crystal chandeliers. She looked utterly ethereal. She was wearing a custom-tailored, floor-length silk gown in a shade of blush so incredibly pale that, in the right lighting, it was simply white. Bridesmaid attire, she'd called it when she forced my mother to approve the purchase. A backup wedding dress, anyone with functioning retinas would call it. But I had let it go. In my first life, I had cried over that dress. In this life, it just made what was about to happen so much sweeter. Chloe tapped the microphone, her eyes shimmering with unshed, perfectly manufactured tears. She scanned the grand ballroom of the Plaza, ensuring every single wealthy socialite, family friend, and business partner had their eyes glued to her. Then her gaze slid to the center of the table, to Mark, my handsome, charming, currently petrified groom. "Excuse me, everyone," Chloe murmured. Her voice was breathy, a masterclass in feigned vulnerability. She let a heavy, dramatic pause hang in the air, her delicate hands coming down to rest gently against the flat, taut silk covering her stomach. "I know today is supposed to be about Evelyn and Mark, but I can't keep living a lie. Not anymore." Another pause. The string quartet had completely stopped playing. You could hear a pin drop on the imported marble floors. "I have an announcement," she breathed into the mic, her voice cracking with the precise amount of engineered emotion. She looked right at my husband of exactly 2 hours. "Marks, I'm pregnant. It's yours." A collective deafening gasp ripped through the ballroom. 300 perfectly manicured guests inhaled all at once. Forks clattered against porcelain plates. Somewhere in the back, an older aunt let out a faint, scandalized shriek. To my left, Mark looked as though he had just been injected with liquid nitrogen. All the blood drained from his face, leaving his spray-tanned skin a sickly, ashen gray. His jaw unhinged, his eyes darting frantically between Chloe's tragic, weeping face and my perfectly still profile. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic, choked wheeze escaped his throat. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, waiting for the lever to pull. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my fork or collapse into a hysterical, sobbing heap. In my first life, that was exactly what I had done. When this exact moment played out the first time, my entire reality had shattered into a million jagged pieces. I had loved Mark with a blinding, stupid loyalty. I had protected Chloe my entire life, constantly stepping aside so she could shine, constantly swallowing my own needs because she was sensitive. Hearing her declare that she was carrying my fiancé's child at my own wedding reception had broken my brain. In that past life, I had screamed. I had thrown my bouquet at Mark's head, my vision blurring with hot, humiliating tears. I had gathered up the heavy, suffocating layers of my designer lace gown and ran. I ran out of the ballroom, down the grand staircase, and bursting through the gilded doors of the venue out into the pouring rain. I just wanted to escape the stares, the pity, the sheer, unadulterated shame of being the ugly, discarded older sister yet again. I was so blinded by my tears that I never saw the delivery truck. I still remember the sound of the tires skidding on the wet asphalt, a horrific, ear-splitting screech that vibrated in my teeth. I remember the paralyzing headlights, the crushing, explosive impact that shattered my ribs and folded my spine like a cheap lawn chair. I remember lying on the freezing wet pavement, my beautiful white gown stained a deep, horrifying crimson. I remember choking on my own blood as the darkness closed in, realizing with agonizing clarity that Chloe had finally taken the one thing she hadn't already stolen: my life. Mark and Chloe would mourn me, play the tragic survivors, and raise their bastard child in the house my money paid for. It was a pathetic, miserable way to die. So you can imagine my absolute shock when I opened my eyes again. I hadn't woken up on wet asphalt. I had woken up drenched in cold sweat, tangled in the high thread count sheets of my own bed. I had thrashed wildly, screaming for a medic, clutching my ribs, expecting to feel shattered bone. But there was no pain. There was no blood. The room was quiet, bathed in the soft morning light. I had scrambled for my phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking so violently I dropped it twice. When the screen finally lit up, the date glared back at me. October 3rd, exactly 3 weeks before my wedding, exactly 21 days before my death. I had sat on the edge of my bed for 3 hours that morning, staring at the wall, my breathing ragged. I remembered dying. I remembered the exact metallic taste of blood in the back of my throat. I remembered the soul-crushing agony of Mark's betrayal. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a memory. The universe, in some twisted, inexplicable glitch of fate, had violently shoved my soul back in time. Once the shock had worn off, the grief had set in, a suffocating, crushing wave of sorrow for the life I thought I was building. But that grief didn't last long. It burned away, leaving behind something much more useful. Rage, pure crystalline, sub-zero rage. Crying wouldn't save me. Screaming wouldn't save me. Confronting them early and canceling the wedding would just allow them to paint me as a paranoid, jealous bride. Chloe would play the victim. Mark would deny everything, and I would be the villain in my own story. If I just canceled the wedding, they would sneak off into the sunset, hand in hand, while I was left picking up the pieces of my shattered reputation. No. If I was going to survive this, I couldn't just avoid the truck. I had to destroy the road. I had to make sure that when the dust settled, Mark and Chloe were left with absolutely nothing. No money, no reputation, no future. So, for 21 days, I didn't shed a single tear. I smiled. I went to cake tastings. I kissed Mark on his lying, cheating mouth. I hugged my sister and told her how beautiful she looked in her near-white dress. And in the shadows, while they were busy sneaking around and laughing at my stupidity, I built an inescapable, ironclad trap. Which brought me to right now. The ballroom was suffocatingly quiet. Everyone was waiting for the explosion. They were waiting for the bride to crack. My mother, seated at the adjacent table, was already half out of her chair, her face a mask of panicked social mortification. Mark's parents looked like they were going to vomit. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my crystal flute. The bubbles danced happily in the golden liquid. I brought the rim to my lips and took a slow, luxurious sip of vintage Dom Perignon. It tasted crisp. It tasted like victory. I set the glass down with a soft, definitive clink. I stood up. I smoothed down the exquisite, intricate beadwork on the bodice of my gown. I didn't look angry. I didn't look devastated. I looked positively radiant. I walked calmly around the edge of the head table. Chloe took a half step back, her eyes widening. She had expected me to throw a glass. She had expected me to scream. This calm, smiling version of her sister was completely off her script. I reached out and gently but firmly pried the microphone from her trembling fingers. "Wow," I said into the mic, my voice projecting across the cavernous room, bright and dripping with cheerful enthusiasm. "What an announcement!" The guests stared at me, paralyzed. A few people exchanged horrified glances, clearly thinking I had suffered a spontaneous, psychotic break. "A baby," I continued, turning to look directly at Mark, whose eyes were bulging out of his skull. "A baby is a blessing. It really, truly is. I mean, as a bride, you expect a few surprises on your wedding day, right? Maybe a forgotten ring or a drunk uncle giving a weird toast. But a secret pregnancy? Now that is top-tier entertainment." "Evelyn," Mark whispered frantically, taking a step toward me. "Evelyn, please, just let me explain. I didn't—" "Oh, hush, sweetheart," I cooed, patting him on the cheek. I could feel the cold, clammy sweat on his skin. It was disgusting. "There's absolutely no need to explain. In fact, Chloe's timing couldn't possibly be better, because I actually prepared a little surprise of my own tonight." I turned back to the crowd, flashing a dazzling, camera-ready smile. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, when my devoted, loving sister started tossing her cookies every morning 2 weeks ago, I got a little suspicious. And as any protective older sister would do, I did a little digging." I paused, letting my eyes lock onto Chloe's. The smug, tragic victim act was melting off her face, replaced by a dawning, primal terror. And what I found, I purred into the microphone, was so fascinating, so absolutely mind-blowing, that I realized I couldn't possibly keep it to myself. I had to share it with all the people we love the most. I turned my gaze toward the DJ booth in the corner of the room. My maid of honor, Sarah, was standing there. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look sad. She looked like a sniper who had just locked onto her target. She had the silver flash drive in her hand. I raised my free hand and gave her a sharp, definitive nod. If everyone could please direct their attention to the projector screens, I announced, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I've brought a special wedding presentation to celebrate the happy couple. The massive automated projector screen began its slow, mechanical descent from the ceiling behind the sweetheart table, humming with a low, vibrating whir that felt like a countdown. As the heavy white canvas rolled down, I watched the faces of my family in the front row. They were all wearing the exact same expression, a toxic cocktail of confusion, horror, and impending embarrassment. They didn't understand. To them, I was just Evelyn. Good old, reliable, boring Evelyn. The girl who never made a fuss. The girl who always took the hit. Chloe hadn't just woken up this morning and decided to steal my fiancé on a whim. She had been practicing for this her entire life, honing her craft of taking what was mine with the precision of an Olympic athlete. It started small. When I was 7, it was my favorite porcelain doll. She smashed its face with a rock, and my parents bought her an ice cream because she cried so hard over her accident. When I was 16, it was my vintage blue silk prom dress, which she borrowed and conveniently spilled bleach on hours before my dance. But as we grew older, the thefts became systemic. When I got accepted into my dream university out of state, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table, their faces pulled into masks of deep parental tragedy. "Evelyn," my mother had sighed, holding my hand, "you know Chloe struggles with her anxiety. She needs to go to that boutique private college in the city to feel safe. And the tuition is just, well, we can't afford both. You're so smart and resilient, Evie. You can get a scholarship anywhere. Be the bigger person." So I gave up my college fund. I worked 3 jobs, took out loans, and clawed my way to a degree, while Chloe dropped out of her expensive private school after 3 semesters to focus on her influencer career. Even my first big professional break was hijacked. I had spent months networking to secure an interview at a top-tier marketing firm. I made the mistake of mentioning the hiring manager's name at Thanksgiving. 2 weeks later, Chloe, armed with her doe-eyed innocence and a dangerously low-cut blouse, had finagled her way into an entry-level position at the same firm, subsequently getting fired 6 months later for sleeping with a married director and causing a company-wide scandal. It effectively blacklisted my name in the industry. And then came Mark. I met him at a coffee shop. He was handsome, ambitious, and seemingly grounded. We built a life together. We bought a townhouse. We merged our bank accounts. But I should have seen the warning signs. I should have recognized the way Chloe looked at him at our engagement party, like a wolf looking at a particularly dim-witted sheep. She started needing his help. Her car broke down and she needed Mark to come jump it. She had a panic attack at 2 a.m. and Mark just had to go sit with her because my parents were out of town. "She's just fragile, Evelyn," he would tell me, slipping into his coat in the middle of the night. "She looks up to me like a big brother." Right, a big brother. In my first life, I had swallowed my nausea. I had played the supportive sister and the trusting fiancé because that was the role assigned to me. Be the bigger person. It was the mantra that had marched me right into an early grave, but Rebirth had burned that mantra to ash. When I woke up in my bed 21 days ago, with the phantom impact of a delivery truck still rattling my bones, I didn't cry over the betrayal. I didn't confront them and demand tearful confessions. Confessions were useless. I didn't want apologies. I wanted mutually assured destruction. And in the modern world, destruction requires documentation. I had exactly 3 weeks to build a guillotine. My first stop was the DNA. If Chloe was going to claim the baby was Mark's, I needed irrefutable, scientifically backed proof of paternity before she could even finish her sentence. Getting Mark's DNA was child's play. The morning after I woke up in my second life, I walked into our shared master bathroom. Mark was in the shower, humming off key, completely oblivious to the fact that his fiancée was currently plotting his absolute ruin. I took a sterile pair of tweezers from my makeup kit, plucked his toothbrush from the holder, dropped it into a heavy-duty Ziploc bag, and replaced it with a brand new one from the closet. He never even noticed. Chloe's DNA required a bit more finesse. I couldn't exactly break into her apartment. I needed her to give it to me willingly. So, 3 days after my rebirth, I invited her out for a sisterly bonding lunch at an upscale cafe downtown. She arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses and carrying a Prada bag I didn't recognize. She sat across from me, picking at a salad, complaining about how stressful it was to be my bridesmaid. "I'm just so exhausted lately," she had sighed, dramatically pressing a hand to her forehead. "I think I might be coming down with something. My stomach has been in knots." "Oh, sweetie," I had cooed, fighting the violent urge to dump my scalding hot Americano into her lap. "You really need to hydrate." I had flagged down the waiter and ordered her a premium bottle of sparkling water. She drank half of it, leaving the heavy glass bottle on the table with her pink lipstick perfectly imprinted on the rim. When she got up to go to the restroom, I didn't hesitate. I slipped a latex glove out of my purse, grabbed the bottle, and shoved it into a plastic evidence bag, burying it at the bottom of my tote. The next morning, I drove 2 hours out of the city to a highly discreet, wildly expensive private genetics laboratory. I didn't want a mail-in kit that they could claim was tampered with. I wanted an ironclad legal document. I sat in a sterile white office across from a technician who looked entirely too bored for the amount of money I was paying him. "I need a non-invasive prenatal paternity test," I told him, sliding the bag toothbrush and the lipstick-stained water bottle across the stainless steel desk. "And I need it expedited. Cost is not a factor. But it has to have a strict, legally binding chain of custody. I need certified affidavits from the lab." The technician raised an eyebrow, looking from the evidence bags to my dead, unblinking eyes. "Ma'am, standard procedure usually involves swabbing the parties in person to establish legal chain of custody." "The mother is roughly 7 weeks pregnant," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I have legal possession of these items. I am willing to sign an affidavit swearing under penalty of perjury that these samples belong to the individuals in question, and I am paying your premium legal tier package. Run the maternal plasma isolation from the saliva on the bottle, isolate the fetal cell-free DNA, and compare it to the buccal cells on the toothbrush. Can you do it, or do I need to find another lab?" He swallowed hard, tapped his keyboard, and quoted me an astronomical sum. I swiped my credit card without a flinch. $7,000 to secure my freedom was a bargain, but I didn't stop there. While waiting for the lab results, I turned my attention to our finances. Mark and I had a joint savings account specifically dedicated to the wedding and our future down payment. I had always handled our day-to-day bills, but Mark had insisted on managing the big-picture wedding budget. At 2 a.m., while Mark was snoring beside me in bed, I sat at the kitchen island bathed in the blue light of my laptop, downloading 2 years' worth of bank statements into a master spreadsheet. It didn't take long for the discrepancies to start flashing like neon warning signs. A $4,500 withdrawal marked catering deposit. A $6,200 transfer labeled floral arrangements. Another $3,800 for venue retainer. I cross-referenced the dates of those withdrawals with Chloe's public Instagram feed. May 14th, $4,500 withdrawn. May 16th, Chloe posts a selfie holding a brand new limited edition Chanel flat bag. Spoiled myself today. #blessed, #independent woman. July 22nd, $6,200 withdrawn. July 24th. Chloe posts a photo of her wrist draped in a sparkling Cartier love bracelet. From a secret admirer, some guys just know how to treat a lady. He wasn't just sleeping with her. He was funding her entire lifestyle with the money I had earned. The money I had saved from working 60-hour weeks. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. I spent the next 4 days gathering every receipt, every bank statement, and every vendor contract. I quietly transferred my half of the remaining funds into an offshore, untouchable private account, leaving only Mark's meager contributions. Then, I met with the wedding vendors one by one, smiling sweetly as I asked them to update the billing contracts strictly to Mark's name, claiming it was a surprise tax deduction strategy his accountant recommended. They happily obliged. By the time the DNA results arrived in a sealed, certified courier envelope 4 days before the wedding, the trap was fully constructed. The steel jaws were open, waiting for them to step inside. And now they had. The projector screen finally clicked into place, glowing a harsh, bright white against the dim, romantic lighting of the ballroom. The spell of shock that had paralyzed the room suddenly broke. The reality of what was happening, that the bride was not backing down but leaning in, sent a shockwave of panic through the older generation. "Evelyn!" My mother's voice sliced through the silence. She had shot out of her chair, her face flushed a blotchy, furious red. Her expensive silk wrap was slipping off her shoulders as she marched toward the head table. "Evelyn Marie, you stop this right now," she hissed, trying to keep her voice low but failing miserably. The microphone in my hand picked up every word. "What are you doing? Are you out of your mind? Put that microphone down and turn that screen off." I looked down at her. She looked frantic. Not for me, of course. She wasn't worried that my heart was breaking. She was worried about the country club gossip. She was worried about the optics. "I'm just sharing some memories, Mom," I said smoothly, my voice echoing over the speakers. "This is not the time for a tantrum," my father barked, stepping up beside my mother. He pointed a thick, trembling finger at me. "Your sister is clearly going through a crisis. She is frightened and vulnerable. We are taking this privately into the bridal suite. Now, be the bigger person, Evelyn. Be the bigger person." The phrase made my blood boil. It felt like a physical strike. "No," I said quietly, though the speakers amplified it into a thunderclap. My parents froze. I had never told them no, never in 25 years. "Evelyn, please," Mark begged. He had finally found his voice, though it sounded like it was being squeezed through a straw. He took another step toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture, looking like a cornered rat. "Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to find out like this. We didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake. Let's just turn off the screen, go in the back, and we can talk about how to handle the baby. I'll take care of you, I promise." "Oh, Mark," I chuckled, a cold, dry sound that made him flinch. "You don't have to worry about taking care of me. You have enough on your plate. After all, stepping up to be a father is a huge financial responsibility." I turned my eyes to Chloe. She was trembling, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. Her perfect, calculated crying had completely stopped. She knew me. She knew that I was a meticulous, obsessive planner. She knew that if I was doing this publicly, I had the cards to back it up. "Sarah," I called out, not taking my eyes off my sister. At the back of the room, Sarah didn't hesitate. She stepped away from the DJ booth, walked over to the massive double mahogany doors that served as the only exit from the ballroom, and grabbed the heavy brass handles. Clack! The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. She pulled the keys from the lock, dropped them straight down the front of her cleavage, and crossed her arms, standing guard like a bouncer at an exclusive club. The guests began to murmur, a low, buzzing hive of anxiety. A few of Mark's groomsmen stood up, looking around uncertainly. "No one is leaving," I announced, my voice dropping its cheerful facade, turning sharp and authoritative. My sister wanted to make a public announcement on my wedding day. She wanted the spotlight. She wanted everyone to hear the truth. So we are going to give her exactly what she wants. We are going to share the whole truth. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the DJ booth. "Hit it, Sarah." Sarah slammed her hand down on the laptop's enter key. The white screen behind me flickered, went black for a fraction of a second, and then illuminated the room with the first slide of my wedding presentation. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, artificial blue light over the elegant floral centerpieces and the terrified faces of my wedding guests. The soft, romantic music had long been killed by Sarah at the DJ booth. Now, the only sound in the cavernous, opulent ballroom was the low, steady hum of the projector fan, cooling the bulb that was about to incinerate my sister's life. Everyone was expecting a slideshow, you know the type. A montage of Mark and me smiling on beaches, hiking up scenic trails we hated but pretended to like for Instagram, and kissing under string lights. They expected an awkward, poorly transitioned PowerPoint of childhood photos set to an Ed Sheeran song. Instead, a massive 15-foot-tall screenshot of an Apple iMessage conversation materialized against the white canvas. The contact name at the top of the projected text thread read, "Maddie, Chloe's BFF." The crowd squinted, trying to make sense of the giant gray and blue bubbles. A low murmur rippled through the back tables as people pulled out their reading glasses. I didn't need glasses. I had memorized every single pixel of this conversation. I had extracted it directly from Chloe's iCloud backup during one of her emergency sleepovers at my house when she left her unlocked iPad on the kitchen counter. "Let me read this for the people in the back," I announced, my voice carrying the crisp, authoritative cadence of an auctioneer selling off a seized estate. I pointed at the first gray bubble on the screen. "This is from Madison, Chloe's absolute best friend sent 3 weeks ago," I said, leaning into the microphone. "Are you seriously going to do it at the wedding? That's brutal, Chloe. Evie will literally die. I paused, letting the words hang in the freezing air of the ballroom. I took a slow, dramatic step to my right, gesturing with my free hand toward the giant blue reply bubble. And here is my sweet, innocent, fragile sister's response, I purred. She deserves it for acting so high and mighty. Besides, Mark is practically begging me to rescue him. I'm going to wear that pale pink dress Mom bought me, stand up during the toasts, and drop the bomb. It's going to be iconic. I can't wait to see her stupid, ugly crying face. A shockwave of pure, unadulterated revulsion slammed into the room. It was as if all 300 people had just been slapped simultaneously. The older aunt in the back row, who had previously shrieked in scandal at Mark's infidelity, now let out a loud, breathless gasp of horror, directed entirely at Chloe. "Evelyn, that's edited, that's fake!" Chloe shrieked. Her voice pitched so high it sounded like a dying bird. She lunged forward, her hands clawing desperately at the air as if she could physically tear the projection down. "You photoshopped that, you hacked my phone, this is illegal!" "Oh, sweetie, if it's fake, why are you shaking?" I asked, my tone dripping with honey. And for the record, accessing a device left unlocked in my own home is a gray area at best. But I'm sure you'd love to take me to court over it. We can read the rest of the threads into the public record. "Turn it off!" "If," my father roared, his face purple with a mixture of rage and profound social embarrassment. He had spent his entire life trying to project the image of a perfect, wealthy, harmonious family. And here I was, standing in a $10,000 gown, ripping the facade down to the studs in front of his golf buddies and business partners. "Evelyn, you are embarrassing this family." "No, Dad," I corrected him sharply, my smile vanishing in an instant. The sudden drop in my tone made him flinch. "I am educating this family. You ask me to be the bigger person. I'm just giving everyone the big picture." "Evie, please," Mark suddenly shouted, stepping in front of Chloe as if shielding her from a physical blow. He puffed out his chest, attempting to summon some phantom shred of masculine dignity. He looked pathetic. His tuxedo was suddenly too tight, sweat gleaming on his forehead under the blue light. "Stop attacking her. It's not her fault." I slowly turned my head to look at him. "Oh, do tell, Mark. Enlighten us all." Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. He looked at the crowd, then at my parents, and finally, he squared his shoulders. He was going to play the noble martyr. He was going to lean into the narrative Chloe had fed him. "We didn't mean to hurt you," Mark stammered, projecting his voice so the front tables could hear. But things haven't been right between us for a long time, Evelyn. You work too much. You're always so cold." Chloe was she was there for me. She listened. We fell in love. We tried to fight it, but we couldn't. Chloe, sensing her cue, immediately buried her face in Mark's shoulder, her shoulders heaving with practiced, delicate sobs. "He forced me at first." She whimpered loudly enough for the mic to pick it up, instantly pivoting her strategy when the true love angle didn't immediately win the crowd. "I told him no. I told him you were my sister, but he said he was trapped. He said he'd call off the wedding if I didn't." "Hey, I never forced you to do anything," Mark hissed, jerking away from her as panic flared in his eyes. The honorable martyr routine instantly vaporized the second she threw him under the bus. "You came to my office. You showed up in a trench coat. You said you loved me," Chloe wailed, grabbing his lapel. "I said I would take care of the baby," Mark yelled back, his face red. He turned back to the crowd, desperately trying to salvage his image. "Look, I made a mistake. A massive mistake. But I'm a man of honor. I am stepping up. I am going to be a father to my child, and I won't let you stand here and humiliate the mother of my baby, Evelyn." I stared at him for a long, quiet moment. The silence in the room stretched tight, like a rubber band about to snap. Then, I started laughing. It wasn't a hysterical laugh. It was a deep, rich, genuinely amused laugh that bubbled up from my chest and echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Mark stared at me, completely unnerved. Chloe's fake crying hitched, her eyes darting nervously toward me. "A man of honor," I repeated, chuckling as I wiped a single happy tear from the corner of my eye, careful not to smudge my waterproof mascara. "Stepping up for your blood. God, Mark, you really should have been an actor. Or a comedian." I turned back to the DJ booth. "Sarah, next slide, please." Click. The iMessage screenshot vanished. The screen flashed white for the microsecond before displaying a heavily watermarked official medical document. At the top, bold black letters read, Clinical Genetics Laboratory. Certified non-invasive prenatal paternity report. The collective breath of 300 people hitched in their throats. What is that? Mark whispered, his bravado entirely evaporating. He squinted at the giant screen, his eyes scanning the medical jargon. That, Mark, is the magic of modern science, I said cheerfully, pacing slowly in front of the head table. You see, while you were busy trying to figure out how to squeeze a baby crib into Chloe's cramped downtown apartment, I took a little trip to a very expensive, very discreet laboratory. I brought them your toothbrush, which I bagged in a sterile Ziploc right out of our bathroom, and a lovely glass water bottle my dear sister drank from during our lunch date last week. Chloe's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated horror. She knew exactly what water bottle I was talking about. I paid $7,000 for an expedited, legally binding chain of custody prenatal DNA test, I explained, tapping the microphone against my chin thoughtfully. They isolate the fetal DNA floating around in Chloe's bloodstream and compare it to the DNA scraped off your molars. Isn't technology fascinating? Mark's entire body began to tremble. He slowly turned his head to look at the massive document on the screen. Let's zoom in on the conclusion, Sarah, just to make sure Mark's honorable eyes can read it, I instructed. Click. The screen magnified the bottom third of the document. The text was so large it could be read from the hotel lobby. Alleged father, Mark Thomas Evans. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Conclusion, excluded as biological father. The ballroom erupted. It was no longer polite gasps or shocked murmurs. It was total, explosive pandemonium. People were shouting, pointing, and covering their mouths. My mother collapsed back into her chair, pressing a napkin to her face as if she were going to be sick. Mark's mother actually shrieked, burying her face in her husband's chest. Mark stood frozen, his eyes glued to the giant 0.00%. His brain visibly short-circuited. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly exhumed corpse. "Zero," Mark whispered. The word barely made it past his lips. He slowly turned his head, his neck mechanically clicking toward Chloe. "Zero? Mark, no, listen, it's a trick," Chloe stammered, stepping back, her high heels catching on the carpet. She faked us hit. She made that document on her computer. You know she hates me. She's just trying to tear us apart. It has a certified watermark and a notary stamp from the state medical board, Chloe. I pointed out smoothly, Asati. But please, feel free to take another one. I hear CVS sells them in the baby aisle now. You? Mark's voice was a low, terrifying growl. He grabbed Chloe by the upper arms, his fingers digging into her pale pink silk dress. Who is it? If it's not me, who the hell is it? It's yours. I swear to God, Mark, it's yours. She sobbed, the panic in her voice completely authentic now. The trap had sprung, and the steel jaws had just clamped shut on her ankle. She's lying to you, Mark, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos of the room like a scalpel. But to be fair, she's been lying to everyone. I signaled Sarah again, click. The DNA test vanished. A new set of text messages appeared on the screen, but this time, the contact name wasn't Maddie. It was Julian. Mark's head snapped toward the screen so fast, I thought I heard a vertebra pop. Julian? He choked out. Julian was Mark's boss. He was the senior managing partner at the real estate firm where Mark worked. He was a 55-year-old silver fox with a net worth hovering around $20 million, a sprawling mansion in the Hamptons, and, most importantly, a very formidable, very wealthy wife named Eleanor, whose family had bankrolled his entire career. And Julian and Eleanor were sitting at table 4, every single head in the room swiveled toward table 4. Julian, who had been sipping a scotch looking mildly amused by the drama unfolding, suddenly looked as though he had swallowed a live grenade. His scotch glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor, pooling amber liquid around his expensive Italian leather shoes. Beside him, Eleanor sat perfectly still, her spine rigid, her eyes narrowing into dangerous reptilian slits as she stared at the screen. "Let's read these, shall we?" I offered brightly, though the venom in my voice was undeniable. "Julian, baby, I took the test. I'm late." I read aloud, my voice dripping with mock sweetness. Julian replies, "Are you sure? You said you were on the pill." Julian tried to stand up, his hands raised. "Evelyn, this is an invasion of privacy. You can't..." "Sit down, Julian, or I will have Sarah cast the photos you sent her to the screen next, and I assure you, nobody wants to see you in a hotel bathrobe, I snapped, pointing a lethal finger at him. Julian slowly, shakily sank back into his chair. Eleanor didn't even look at him. She just kept staring at the texts. I turned my attention back to the screen. Let's skip to the good part, I said. Chloe, I'm pregnant. It's yours. But don't worry, Mark is an idiot. He thinks it's his. I'm going to make him claim it at the wedding so Evie dumps him. Then he'll have to support me. I paused, letting Mark absorb the absolute destruction of his ego. He wasn't the tragic lover. He wasn't the honorable father. He was the fall guy. He was the designated wallet. Julian, I continued reading, my voice echoing mercilessly. Perfect. Keep my name out of it. If Eleanor finds out, she'll divorce me and take the firm. Keep the kid pinned on Mark, and I'll sign the lease on that penthouse at the Ritz you wanted. Just keep your mouth shut. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening, heavy. Then Eleanor stood up. She was a tall, regal woman in a stunning emerald gown, dripping in family money diamonds. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She slowly picked up her clutch purse, turned to Julian, and delivered a slap so vicious, so flawlessly executed that the sharp crack echoed like a pistol shot. Julian's head whipped to the side, a bright red handprint instantly blooming across his cheek. My lawyers will be at your office on Monday at 8 a.m., Eleanor stated, her voice quiet but carrying the lethal force of a nuclear warhead. Do not come to the house. Your bags will be on the curb. She turned on her heel and began marching toward the locked double doors at the back of the ballroom. Sarah, unlock the door for Eleanor, please. And only Eleanor, I commanded. Sarah happily obliged, turning the deadbolt to let the furious, soon-to-be ex-wife storm out into the lobby before loudly locking the door right back behind her. Julian sat at table 4, holding his cheek, completely shattered. His marriage, his firm, and his fortune were effectively vaporized in less than 60 seconds. Up at the head table, Mark was breathing heavily, like a dying animal. He let go of Chloe's arms, stepping backward, his eyes wide and hollow. Mark, Chloe sobbed, reaching out for him, her carefully constructed world crumbling into dust around her. Mark, please, it doesn't matter. We can still be together. We can... Don't touch me, Mark roared, smacking her hand away with such force that she stumbled backward into the wedding cake table. You used me, you disgusting, manipulative... You used me for a penthouse? I needed security, Chloe screamed back, finally dropping the innocent victim act. Her face contorted into an ugly, desperate snarl. He has $20 million, Mark. What do you have? A mortgage and a leased BMW. You think I actually wanted to be with you? You're a pathetic middle manager. I just needed a father on the birth certificate so Julian would pay for my apartment. The absolute depravity of the confession hung in the air. Even my parents, who had spent 25 years making excuses for Chloe's behavior, were staring at her as if she had suddenly grown horns and a tail. My mother was openly weeping, hiding her face in her hands, while my father looked like he was about to have a myocardial infarction. You ruined my life, Mark whispered, his hands pulling at his own hair. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, his eyes begging for a lifeline that I had absolutely no intention of throwing. Evie, oh my God, what have I done? You made a choice, Mark, I said softly, lowering the microphone for a moment. You chose her, and now you get to keep her. I raised the microphone back to my lips. The show wasn't over. The social destruction was complete, but the financial ruin had only just begun. Now that we've cleared up the paternity issue and established that Mark just threw away his career, his marriage, and his dignity to be the designated cuckold for a real estate tycoon, I announced brightly. Let's talk about the wedding bill, shall we? The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind Eleanor, sealing her furious diamond-draped exit. For 3 agonizing seconds, the ballroom existed in a state of suspended animation. No one breathed. No one moved. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic whirring of the projector fan above us, casting its unforgiving glow over the absolute wreckage of my wedding day. Then the vacuum broke, and the room exploded. It was a symphony of upper-crust chaos. 300 guests, a carefully curated collection of the city's wealthiest socialites, business magnates, and gossiping extended family members, all lost their collective minds at once. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of shrieks, angry shouts, and frantic whispers. Phones were suddenly out, screens glowing in the dim light as people began furiously texting anyone who wasn't lucky enough to secure an invitation. At table 4, Julian was having a full-blown meltdown. His silver fox facade had completely melted away, leaving a sweaty, red-faced, middle-aged man watching his $20 million empire disintegrate. Eleanor's family didn't just bankroll his firm. Her father owned the holding company that leased their commercial spaces. "Julian," Chloe cried out, her voice cracking as she stumbled away from Mark and toward the head of the dance floor. The pink silk of her dress swished around her ankles as she reached out a trembling, desperate hand toward the older man. "Julian, please! You said you'd take care of us. You promised me the penthouse." Julian's head snapped up. If looks could incinerate, Chloe would have been a pile of ash on the imported marble. "Stay the hell away from me, you stupid little tramp," Julian roared, his voice tearing through the ambient roar of the crowd. He stood up, kicking his chair back so violently it crashed into the neighboring table. He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at her, the red handprint from Eleanor's slap glowing vibrantly on his cheek. "You were supposed to keep your mouth shut. You told me he was going to claim it. You ruined me. I'm done. You are on your own." "Julian, no!" Chloe wailed, her face crumbling into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. The safety net she had spent months weaving, trading her dignity and my fiancé for luxury real estate, was gone in an instant. Julian didn't even look back. He grabbed his suit jacket off the back of his chair and stormed toward the back of the room. He banged his fist against the locked double doors until Sarah, wearing a terrifyingly sweet smile, unlocked it just long enough to shove him out into the lobby. Up at the head table, Mark was watching Julian's retreat with the blank, hollow stare of a soldier who had just watched his commanding officer take a mortar shell to the chest. You could practically see the gears grinding to a violent halt in his brain. Julian was out, Eleanor was taking the firm, and Mark? Mark was the idiot middle manager who had been secretly colluding with Julian's pregnant, teenage-brained mistress, attempting to claim the bastard child as his own while publicly humiliating the bride in front of half the city's real estate tycoons. "My job," Mark whispered, his knees buckling slightly as he braced his hands against the edge of the sweetheart table. His breath was coming in short, hyperventilating gasps. Eleanor is going to fire me. She's going to blacklist me." He looked up at the crowd. His groomsmen, the guys he had golfed with for 5 years, were staring at him with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. His own parents were sitting at table 1 in stunned, horrifying silence. His mother had her face buried in her hands, weeping, while his father was glaring at Mark with a look of absolute rigid shame. "My career's over," Mark choked out, his voice cracking. He turned his desperate, bloodshot eyes back to me. Evie, I have nothing. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my house." "Oh, Mark," I said, my voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. I walked over to the small, decorative side table where my bridal clutch was sitting. "You aren't just going to lose your job. We haven't even gotten to the fun part yet." I unclasped the pearl-encrusted handbag and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope. The heavy thud it made when I dropped it onto the sweetheart table managed to cut through the surrounding noise. Mark flinched as if it were a live explosive. "What is that?" he breathed, his eyes wide and terrified. "Consider it my wedding gift to you." I smiled, sliding the envelope across the pristine white linen tablecloth until it bumped against his knuckles. Mark's hands were shaking so violently that he fumbled the flap 3 times before finally tearing it open. A thick stack of formally bound legal documents slid out, stamped with the unmistakable blue ink of a top-tier litigation firm. He stared at the bold, capitalized words on the first page, his lips moving silently as he struggled to process the legalese. "Since reading doesn't seem to be your strong suit today, allow me to summarize," I announced, turning to ensure the microphone picked up every word. The crowd was starting to quiet down again, sensing that the bloodletting was far from over. "Everyone loves a good train wreck, especially when they don't have to pay for a ticket. That is a formal civil lawsuit, Mark," I explained, leaning comfortably against the table, "for the exact sum of $45,622, plus illegal fees." 45, Mark choked, his eyes darting frantically over the pages. "What? Evelyn, what is this? I don't have $45,000. "You did," I corrected him sharply, or rather, we did. That was my exact half of our joint wedding and house savings account, the account I dutifully deposited my paychecks into for 3 years. "I spent that on the wedding," Mark shouted defensively, looking around the room as if trying to win over a jury. "The venue, the flowers, the catering, it was all for today." I let out a harsh barking laugh. I signaled Sarah. Click. The projector screen shifted again. This time, it displayed a meticulously organized, color-coded spreadsheet side by side with screenshots of Chloe's Instagram posts. Let's play a fun game called Follow the Money. Danime, I said brightly. I pointed to a red highlighted row on the spreadsheet. May 14th, a cash withdrawal of $4,500. The memo line says, catering deposit. I stepped to the side, pointing to the accompanying photo. May 16th, Chloe's Instagram. A brand new Chanel flat bag. Retail price? $4,500. A collective disgusted groan rippled through the guests. Chloe, who had been sobbing near the cake table, suddenly shrank into herself, her face turning a violent shade of magenta. July 22nd, I continued relentlessly. $6,200 withdrawn. Memo. Floral arrangements. 2 days later, Chloe posts a photo of her wrist sporting a brand new Cartier love bracelet. Retail? Exactly $6,200. I turned back to Mark, my smile fading into a look of absolute lethal coldness. You didn't spend my money on this wedding, Mark. You spent it funding the lavish lifestyle of my narcissistic sister so she would keep sleeping with you while she was simultaneously sleeping with your boss. You stole from me to buy her silence and her affection. Evelyn, please, Mark begged, tears freely spilling down his cheeks now. I'll pay it back. I swear to God I'll pay it back. Just don't sue me. If Eleanor fires me, I won't be able to afford a lawyer. I'll go bankrupt. Oh, you're definitely going bankrupt, Mark, I assured him cheerfully. But the lawsuit is only half of your problem. Turn to the second tab in the folder. Mark swallowed a dry, terrified lump in his throat and flipped to the next section of the legal packet. His eyes scanned the pages, and I watched in real time as the last remaining drop of blood drained from his face. He looked like he was about to pass out. What is this? He whispered. These are the vendor contracts. Indeed they are, I nodded. I gestured grandly to the opulent ballroom around us. The towering centerpieces of white orchids, the crystal stemware, the 5-course plated dinner being kept warm in the back. A wedding of this caliber isn't cheap. In fact, the total remaining balance for tonight's festivities is just shy of $80,000. But you paid the deposits, Mark stammered, his voice thin and reedy. Your parents paid the venue fee. The rest was going on your credit card. Was it? I tapped my chin in mock confusion. Because last Tuesday, I had a very productive afternoon making some phone calls. I contacted the Plaza's event manager. I contacted the florist, the caterer, the string quartet, and the luxury car service. I told them that my brilliant, generous fiancé and his lovely bridesmaid sister wanted to handle the final billing as a surprise. Chloe's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face contorting in horror. What? I transferred all the vendor contracts strictly into your names, and smiled, looking between the two of them. Mark Thomas Evans and Chloe Marie Sterling. Legally binding, signed with the electronic authorizations you both so graciously gave me access to when I was planning this whole circus. You two are on the hook for every single penny of this $80,000 party. You can't do that, Chloe shrieked, stomping her foot like a petulant toddler. I don't have $80,000. I work part-time at a boutique. I'm broke. Well, maybe you should sell the Chanel bag, I suggested mildly. Evelyn, this is insane, Mark yelled, panic entirely consuming him. He threw the folder onto the floor. The vendors won't accept this. You're the bride. This is your wedding. Actually, a deep booming voice called out from the back of the room. The crowd parted slightly as Mr. Harrison, the senior event director for the Plaza, stepped forward. He was a distinguished older gentleman in an immaculate tuxedo, and he did not look amused. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm. Miss Sterling, the elder Miss Sterling, that is entirely correct, Mr. Harrison announced, his voice carrying the calm, detached authority of a man who dealt with wealthy people's meltdowns for a living. The billing contracts were legally transferred and authorized. The hotel and all associated vendors will be collecting the final balance from Mr. Evans and the younger Miss Sterling. If the balance is not settled within 30 days, we will send it to our aggressive collections agency and place liens on any applicable assets. He gave a curt, professional bow and stepped back into the shadows. Mark let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He grabbed his own hair, pulling at the roots, spinning in a circle as he looked at the sheer extravagance surrounding him. Every bite of truffle risotto, Every sip of champagne, every single orchid in this room was now his financial burden. He was unemployed, publicly disgraced, facing a $45,000 theft lawsuit, and strapped with an $80,000 bill for a wedding that had just spectacularly imploded. Ruin. Complete, absolute, systemic ruin. It was beautiful, but a masterpiece is never truly finished until you sign it. And I had one last group of people to deal with. Evelyn, enough! My father's voice boomed over the chaos. He marched up to the sweetheart table, his face a terrifying, mottled purple. The veins in his neck looked like they were ready to burst. My mother was right behind him, weeping hysterically into a lace handkerchief, her makeup running in dark, jagged streaks down her face. You will stop this right now! My father demanded, slamming his fist onto the table so hard the crystal champagne flutes rattled. He pointed a finger inches from my face. You have made your point. You have humiliated everyone. Now you call off this ridiculous lawsuit, you pay this hotel bill, and you fix this. I didn't flinch. I just stared at him, my expression completely flat. Fix it? I echoed softly. She is your sister, Evelyn, my mother wailed, reaching out to grab my arm. I took a sharp step back, refusing to let her touch me. She recoiled as if I had burned her. Look at her. She is pregnant, she's terrified, and you are destroying her life. Over what? A mistake? You have money, Evelyn. You have a good job. You can afford this. They can't. So I should pay for it? I asked, my voice deadly calm, though the microphone carried the lethal edge of it to every corner of the silent ballroom. I should pay for the wedding that my fiancé used to cheat on me with my sister? I should pay for the child she conceived with a married man to secure a luxury apartment? Family protects family, my father roared, attempting to use the same booming, authoritative voice he used to intimidate his employees. You are the older sister. You are supposed to take care of her. Be the bigger person, Evelyn, for the love of God. Be the bigger person. The mantra, the suffocating, toxic mantra that had defined my entire existence. The phrase that had led me to a cold, bloody death on wet asphalt in a life I was never going to live again. Something inside me snapped. Not with hysteria, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. Protect family? I repeated, stepping around the table so I was face to face with my father. I didn't need the microphone for this. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. Let's talk about how you protect family, Dad. I turned my body slightly so the entire room of their wealthy peers, country club friends, and judgmental relatives could hear every single word. When I was 17, I got accepted into Columbia on early admission, I said, my voice ringing out, crisp and unyielding. I had worked for 4 years to earn it. But Chloe had a panic attack because she didn't want to go to state school. So you took my entire college fund, every single penny my grandparents left for me, and you bought her way into an overpriced private academy that she dropped out of 3 semesters later. And you told me to be the bigger person and take out student loans. My father's jaw slacked. Murmurs erupted from the tables where my aunts and uncles were sitting. They had never known that. They had been told I chose a cheaper school to stay grounded. When I was 22, I bought my first car, a used Honda. I paid for it in cash from working double shifts, I continued, taking a step closer to my mother, who was shaking her head in frantic denial. Chloe borrowed it to go to a party, drove drunk, and wrapped it around a telephone pole. You didn't punish her. You didn't make her pay me back. You paid off the police to keep it off her record, bought her a brand new BMW to soothe her trauma, and told me to take the bus. Because she's sensitive. My mother let out a loud, pathetic sob. Evelyn, stop, please. People are listening. Good, I barked, my voice cracking like a whip. I want them to listen. I want everyone in this room to look at you, to look at the monsters you created. I pointed a shaking, furious finger at Chloe, who was cowering behind the cake table, weeping into her hands. Look at her, I shouted. She didn't just stumble into my fiancé's bed. She didn't just accidentally sleep with a married billionaire. She did it because you spent 25 years teaching her that there are no consequences. You taught her that whatever she wants, she can take, and Evelyn will just absorb the damage. You raised a parasite. Don't you speak about your sister that way, my father bellowed, raising a hand as if he were going to strike me. Several groomsmen and my uncle immediately stood up, chairs scraping loudly against the floor, ready to intervene. But I didn't back down. I stepped right into his space, my eyes burning with a lifetime of unspent fire. Do it, I whispered, my voice a venomous hiss. Hit me in front of 300 witnesses. Add assault to the list of things you're going to have to explain to your golf buddies tomorrow." My father's hand froze midair. He looked around. The faces staring back at him weren't looking at a respected patriarch. They were looking at a fraud. His business partners were whispering. The gossiping socialites were typing furiously on their phones. The pristine, untouchable reputation of the Sterling family was currently burning to the ground, and I was the one holding the gasoline. He slowly lowered his hand, his face pale and defeated. "You are no daughter of mine," he spat, his voice trembling with humiliated rage. "If you walk out those doors tonight, you are dead to us. You get nothing. We will cut you out of the will. We will disown you." I stared at him. I looked at my mother, who couldn't even meet my eyes. I looked at Chloe, ruined, bankrupt, and publicly branded a homewrecker. And finally, I looked at Mark, the spineless, cheating coward who was currently hyperventilating on the floor next to a pile of legal documents that would haunt him for the next decade. I felt lighter. I felt like a 100-pound weight had just been unbuckled from my chest. "Keep your money," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. I reached up and pulled the delicate diamond-studded tiara out of my hair, a family heirloom my mother had insisted I wear. I dropped it onto the floor at her feet. It landed with a dull, pathetic clink. "I don't need your inheritance. I don't need your fake love, and I certainly don't need your toxic, parasitic existence dragging me down anymore," I announced, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with absolute finality. I picked up the microphone one last time. "To all my guests," I said cheerfully, addressing the stunned, silent ballroom. "Thank you so much for coming. The open bar is fully funded, the risotto is excellent, and Mr. Evans will be picking up the tab. Have a wonderful night. I highly suggest tipping the bartenders." I dropped the microphone onto the sweetheart table. Thud. I didn't run this time. I didn't gather my skirts and flee in tears. I turned around, my head held high, my posture impeccable. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my custom lace train gliding smoothly over the marble floor. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one said a word. The silence was a mixture of awe, terror, and absolute respect. As I reached the grand double doors, Sarah was already there, holding one open for me. She was beaming, a fierce, proud smile on her face. "Bali?" she whispered as I passed her. "Bali," I confirmed, stepping out into the cool, quiet elegance of the hotel lobby. Behind me, the doors swung shut, cutting off the sound of Mark's sudden, hysterical sobbing, my mother's wailing, and the explosive murmur of 300 guests tearing my family's reputation to shreds. The trap had sprung, the monsters were locked inside, and for the first time in 25 years, I was completely, beautifully free.